Arriving into this subject firsthand, which intrigued my curiosity greatly to the utmost extent, must willingly enable myself to provide this vital disclaimer. Coming off as someone who enjoys putting others down for the pleasure of it is your delusion. I may, at any given rate, use opposites for dissecting any such thing I favor in. That is it. In addition to this, if people I refer to or any others who are astoundingly compelled from disliking what I have to say, strolling right past me is your preeminence over any other decision you might conjure, given I play my favorite of all instruments. The topic of this matter I will be discussing is a video by Freely the Banana Girl. This video in particular had extreme inputs on feeling, such as people who eat meat do not deserve to live and other things of that sort, which stated from her was yet another YouTube username named Kelly, speaking in defense of her on how it was a misunderstanding involving immense passion, while others had different opinions. Well, Freely may have been showing this, for how a doctrine's withheld will stand for any such outcome it hinders. Watching said video in the description below firstly is necessary. My attention had all the more directed itself toward Freely's way of action earlier on having met Durian Rider. Though I never will know the exact outcome of this affair, hence prediction suits quite well an eye at this juncture. Freely was overweight, eating meat, in due course growing to be a raw vegan. Now, in an extended period of time that small, however short of its length, she hadn't met up with Durian Rider just yet. Whether it being actually right when she started or not, Durian Rider did become a part of her life. And every video of hers as such leading up to this very distinct one, as well as additional, aimed in that respect, really unveils her in past recordings, and that there never seemed to be in her a sense of extreme way of thinking, clutching on to her belief too tightly as indoctrination in a light sense, for she did get related to as Hitler by other responders. At first glance, her neutrality came across as full before being a vegan, thus fitting into it where she wasn't too positive about her inner self nor too negative, in spite of that just coming off into the norm. Now, did she experience negative feelings, etc.? Indeed she did, though I look at the overall pie in the oven when it is done, not being so where as I engrave in that one little cherry on top. On a side note, if this fails to be true under the result that they both met and at the same time ended up holding on to their belief as such through how easy and influential it was, or etc., then alright. But for all intents and purposes, let's just say this is true. With an unneeded explanation, one could frankly conclude, since how unwillingly negative and extreme Durian Rider is about veganism due to his fixation, given this possibility that he himself was like this beforehand, can possibly allude to the fact in which he rubbed off on Freely, not manipulating, rubbing off. Intriguingly enough, when one pole presented contains protons within it, another pole with electrons rubbing against it will only have the reaction of that pole remaining positive, symbolizing its rule over the negative charge, the shackle and rocket. Even so, having a neutral pole as the other with electrons rubs against it will undoubtedly have that neutral pole become a negative pole. Being controlled, persuaded, is tremendously easy as it is to be extroverted. To go along with the crowd. For you aren't one with yourself. Now I say that as much as it is accorded. Is being an extrovert bad? Well, detrimentally if you so happen to spiral into an outward force of comfortability on one end, too much on the introverted side, you might talk to yourself. And if you're too on the other, your whole group of peers could break apart as molecules during respiration to symbolize aloneness and growth. Because we all know that once you breathe in, you breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. The question is not only how deep in do you breathe, but what will it take to balance the too little or too large? Well, the only solution would seem to be as an act of eustress, meaning to take a negative principle to turn it into a positive, to show the extroverted side of you as a way to be social around high spirits which complement your greatness, find winners in life, etc. So, talking about persuasion, being extroverted, would this be an act of standing or jumping up? Standing can occur right here, but, yet, coming back to this, rubbing off on someone without knowing you do it isn't as similar with a negative feeding off another negative charge for a pleasure principle. Rather, Freely herself simply represents a normal human being with the option to either jump up or stand. Being in this state can make it easy enough for Freely to have the greater chance of easily having Durian Rider pull her into his way of belief because she wasn't at that state of being way up within herself prior to meeting him, which of course, with the negative now it is seen. Over and above that, this video goes further than just about Freely. I feel it being of great significance and value for me to speak on being a vegan and being a carnivore, and if you're wondering, I was a vegetarian for 5 months. I find it funny how there is also proof out there that meat is good for you, not being geared toward the act of controversy. Way back thousands of years ago, supposedly being a carnivore is how you would survive because of this primal instinct, but there were no vegans by virtue of this. Herbivores also were depended upon by eating vegetables, converting it into energy stored in their flesh, where we would, possibly now after the Ice Age leaning a little more toward the carnivorous side, receive their nutrients that way to furthermore having the energy to farm, etc. Must not forget your canine teeth as well. Tearing into meat as your molars are to grind plants. It's also necessary to point out that eating meat or vegetables is not really the problem, though a balance is in my opinion needed, as it is to the processed things you are consuming. If you say meat is bad for you based off a certain brand, I could tell you that anything processed which doesn't contain meat is bad for you. I find this kind of interesting that organic meat won't get to mention on top of the fact that they will identify certain meats that could be unhealthy, given that they don't say how bad anything which is processed with no dairy or meat is, because they would say it doesn't have meat in it. Even so, killing an animal right then and there, where, when not greatly seized, wouldn't have your vitality opposite to replenishing, but do very well for you, provided these variables play out. But perhaps rotating from being a carnivore to a vegan as seasons change, furthermore listening in on what your body needs all the more, would be interesting to consider. Look at a carnivore and a vegan as pertaining to the states as being extroverted and introverted, whereas the balance in between the two is an omnivore. And not obstructing but breaking down this action of occurrence, addressing hands-on the two types of food chains in the outlook of nature is necessary. Nature, the vicious cycle of dog-eat-dog, as the bigger dominates the small by killing it for survival, etc. This fashion of nature represents the wolf pack, of circle attacking circle with differentiation, although usually ones with no backup is the victim, and that circle-to-circle statement could have easily implied people. And of course there's mobbing of all sorts and protecting their offspring or young, but the fact remains that if one or more went into a circle, a fight would arise. Then you bear the other food chain of nature, whereas it isn't of hurting anyone or anything but loving all things, being fully secure as to not be violent without it originally. The levels of structure are similar to the other food chain, but they are diverse in this way. Nobody's above me in a loving or hurtful way. Look at the negative and positive principles of power to understand. Understand. The etymology of the word understand is what some may argue as false, but it seems inevitably obvious as you break it down to simply mean, if your knowledge on a topic is under what's above it, then what do you need to do if you, the negative charge, need to accomplish when under something? To overcome something you don't know, to furthermore grow. To understand implies the act of altering what was said to you underlying what's subtle, as so you being above in the sense of your own perception, changing what was in power, as natural food, which was altered, not quite as a plant growing from putting hormones into its system, but as people who overcome a nasty fascist leader by altering how evil it was to restore good. The shackle and controller, if haven't shown yet, will be determined through two opponents at the same level. To add more, the word grok in the novel Stranger in a Strange Land, and I quote, to understand so thoroughly that the observer becomes a part of the observed, end quote. So it's through your own perception that you are able to understand, and that overcoming you perceiving it is as you becoming one with it, as altered food in that relationship, or hence Lucifer as the concrete manifestation of God. Getting back to the food chains, it's all one and the same, even if a plant can't feel pain like an animal can, as an animal can't consciously think at a level humans can. They're all just positives and negatives, as with the pole example coincided accordingly. In saying all this, I'd appreciate if you wouldn't look at me as if I support the torturing and killing of animals. I only step back out of opposition, of course, from all angles to look at what opposites do. That's it. All the while, always knowing in turn a game is a game when it isn't. So, from the food chain example, from nature of the negative principle, let's take for instance, if this was a fight in nature which had to be overcome. On one side there is the meat eaters, and then, on the other hand, you have Freely the banana girl. On Freely's way of thinking, the meat consumers are the weight, the negative charge she must overcome. In doing so, she not only became passionate enough to want to push up this weight of the meat eaters, but it was her sense of negativity holding on to the ideology. Then she became to where she would cause verbal harm on meat eaters to influence, etc. If saying all this, what your ego now could want relief from is if it is wrong to eat animals, or who is in the right, the vegan or the carnivore. But those animals were tortured by people, true, and the ones who believe something should be done will take action. For if it so happens that every human on this planet doesn't eat meat does not mean that same negative principle won't ever apply again and perhaps a different way will get patched up or vanish. As many say they'll change the world for the better, when really it's all about grabbing a certain audience, moreover from the diversity of fear, thus separation. You take away the guns, and the sticks and stones will be used, and so forth. We could even throw 100 from the factory out in a jungle to be torn apart violently by hungry animals who would look at us like food. For the difference is how developed humans are than animals under the same negative principle, undermining the irony in that someone would then use the fact that it was for survival purposes that the animal did this to eat another animal so it had no choice. If asked to implicate Americans having the right now as they didn't back in earlier times would make it any more correct than not. For some could branch off to also say, as if animals can't feel like us. Wait a second, hold on. Hold on, Ayn Rand. What about altruism? What about a mother whale weeping, crying out when a sailor takes its baby away? A reply right there, straight to having a conscious choice in whatever we so desire. That's no different than one straight line as more added straight lines curving out in different directions, or perhaps better yet, a dog behind a fence as a man is in this small town. A rat in a maze rejected as a man who asked too many questions. Coming back to the survival statement in animals, how they had no choice, they say this and possibly forgetting it still goes on all around the world, where it wouldn't just be animals the humans would eat, for it could involve cannibalism in an area out to nothing where the variable wouldn't be vegetables anywhere around. When starving to death, would the person be morally wrong then to survive on what it has to, for no choice was made upon it? And if it did have a choice, does it make any difference? Well, of course it does, but let's not look at how different things are. Let's look at what's the same. Blood flowing through my veins. Cars flowing through traffic. Different cells in my body killing other cells, invading, or just being there innocently in parts of my body by virtue of difference. Wars being fought in the body of the world where the different teams kill each other from invasion, or just being there innocently where one lives and the other dies from differences. In turn, my healthy body will continue aging from this process, as the unhealthy body of the world will continue its process of growth through wars. So, what is right and what is wrong? How would we know what to do? Well, knowing the cyclic rhythm, but we'll just talk about the body. Under the structured principle of the negative and plus from helping the body grow through cells dying and growing, even knowing that cells kill each other to have it work, could it be that everything is a contradiction within itself? That through what you think and say has the opposite of it trying to overcome you in the same way lines do? And if this opposite overcomes your initial opposite of your first-hand thoughts or sayings, this will be the new outcome, until you try again and again and again to alter it, like jumping up and down, breathing in and out, and this just keeps going and going until you finish growth. There is good and evil. Wrong and right are interconnected as one like batteries in a toy car. I'm having you realize that they are one and the same to go on from there. So, look at right and wrong as this. You're the opposite trying to get another opposite. So, to finally give the conclusion is where I simplistically say there really is no point in any of this, due to it being all the same. It will not matter who is ever secure and insecure, because the person in control is just as much controlled by the controlled controlling it. But now on the flip side, it really does matter. To have a point to this is the elusive way to forget it's all the same. I think Alan Watts quoted from the Bible how when before the Lord created everything he said, get lost. That when we grow, we're actually getting back to where it was through the act of taking it seriously in the unserious thing we call a game. And in order for diversity to have worked, there had to have been switching up to then start variation.